Hello guys, welcome to the channel, and it's me Ramanuj Kashyap at the helm of Hangout.Audio. And today I'll be talking about an IEM which I haven't really seen reviews of. Even if I were to venture into forums like Reddit and Facebook and Headfi and all, this IEM really didn't take off in the way that it should have. And a friend of mine, he's very close to me, and both him and I, we banter in terms of the memes in audio world and talk about the gear and choices of music in general. And he was like, hey, I have this IEM with me, do you want to review it? And I was like, yes, and I pounced upon that opportunity. And I'm glad I did, because this IEM has a lot more to offer, even though it's a dated release, and people should actually try this out and see if they can get it for themselves, because it's got a strong, energizing sound signature, and it's a very well executed IEM, I would say. I wouldn't say flawless, because it does have flaws. Come on, no IEM, no headphone is downright perfect, but I think it could serve well for a lot of people who are into the energetic sound when it comes to asking from their gear and all. And this is the Juzear Dragonfly 81T. Juzear also has a sibling of this. I think it's called the Butterfly 61T, and I would also try to get my hands on that IEM as well. But for now, we'll talk about the Juzear 81T. Shout out to my friend Arkaprava Paul for sending out this IEM. Anyway, since it's not a full set, this is as far as the introduction goes. I only have the IEM with me, and the best tips I would say that I have found with this IEM are the Divinus Velvet narrow bores, the Azla Origin, Spinfit CP 100 Plus, Final E, and then lastly the Tangzo Sankai Balanced. And my choice in ear tips are from best to worst in this regard. So I think we are done with this segment. Let's move on to how the sound is. Now that we are mostly done with what the IEM is and what it has to offer, don't mind me guys, my voice is still sitting a bit low. I shouldn't be getting greedy on ice cream. Anyway, as the segment goes, it will be divided into three parts: the lows, the mids, and the highs. And this time I have kept my choice for just limited to 2 tracks per section. So for the lows, as usual, one is Mariscos by Tipper and the other one is Limelight by Rush. So in Tipper's Mariscos, the 81T actually leads out quite strong. Like right from the intro, where there is a rippling effect to greet you into what the overall track's mood would be like. The 81T has a nice polish over the ripples, I would say. And once the beats come in, I felt that it could have been less boomy, at least in this regard. And while the rippling intro sounded quite clean, a less amount of boom would have settled the transition from just the rippling to the main beats and the elements a bit better with a more finesse. And the texture that this song has, the track has, it's kind of fuzzy, and it's also got this whole phase-like elements where it comes and goes like the blooming of a flower across seasons. And the 81T captures everything that to a fault. The beats overall are very potent, and people who want that overwhelming amount of surge in their lows, they would appreciate this IEM. But for me, I appreciate a certain degree of punch or slam, as a lot of people would say, but I don't want it to exceed beyond the threshold that I'm acquainted with. And the 81T across movements cross that threshold. So if someone is out there who's saying that the IEM feels boomy through tracks like this, they won't be wrong. But if someone wants their entire track to sound a bit boomy right out of the gate, then only a few IEMs like the 81T can still do it while maintaining a healthy amount of texture, a healthy amount of detail, cutting through the overwhelming boom. Now moving on to Rush's Limelight, tonality of the 81T is established beyond reasonable doubt that it's not a balanced IEM. It's got a nice aggressive V-shaped sound where the mids actually don't feel quite recessed, but we'll come to that later. Let's talk about in more detail when it regarding the 81T's bass when it comes to tracks like this. So the initial boom that I had observed in Tipper's Mariscos, here I don't feel it coming across. In fact, I would say that the 81T was doing a better job in my benchmark compared to what I heard in the previous track. And the way the bass comes off in this track is polished. There is a good amount of note weight in it where the bass doesn't feel too floaty. It doesn't feel like it's going to evaporate. And while it balances the notes from the bass line with a healthy amount of weight where the perception of the notes was quite full, kicks and toms further accentuate the joy I was having while listening to this track. And I would say that this is a very hard track for IEMs to actually represent it in the way that it should be, and the 81T does it quite nicely. Only thing I would say is that the vocals could have been a bit more forward sounding, but that won't be happening because we are already observing a certain amount of interception or the interference that we can see when it comes to the pronunciation of the effects of the bass. So if the 81T could have cut that just by a small notch, vocals on Limelight or similar tracks like Spirit of Radio for example as well, so the vocals would have come out in a much more satisfying manner, I would say. Don't get me wrong, it's just me preferring the sound to be coming that way. But if someone is in the market where they want their whole lows to sound in that specific way, then there is not. I would say that the 81T does a very fantastic job of it. And when it comes to separation, the bass line, the notes of the kicks and the notes of the toms are quite isolated, yet they come in cohesively, which means that in a first glance, the 81T demonstrates to having a good degree of instrument separation for me to enjoy the tracks. So that's about it for the lows. Let's just scurry across to the mid-range. So now let's see how the 81T does to the mid-range. And as usual, two tracks again. One is Cantate Domino by Alf Linder, and the second one is First It Give It by Queens of the Stone Age. So the 81T actually makes the keys and the horns sound a bit warmer than what I would prefer, or what actually should be the norm when it comes to letting Cantate Domino start. And I won't blame the IEM for it because it has the entire sound like that. But the thing is, the 81T doesn't really overstep its boundaries this time when it comes to providing a degree of warmth in this track. And I would say that the timbre could have been a bit more accurate sounding when it came to the keys especially. But again, that's a nitpick for me because the way the 81T is handling tonality, timbre is actually bound to sound a bit off. But you need to push the IEM through tracks like this to know what exactly is going wrong. And when we come to the other track, you will see the reversal that the 81T does, at least in this matter. Anyway, moving on. When the choir comes in this track on the 81T, I just enjoyed how breathtaking my perception was. Why I say breathtaking? It's because the separation between the notes and the isolation of the elements, the 81T had no confusion which to prioritize. In fact, it handled both the isolation of the elements in the track as well as the separation between the notes with relative ease. And imaging is also a very strong suit of the 81T, as I felt that everything was positioned where they need to be. Controversial take, soundstage in IEMs doesn't really exist, but we'll elaborate on it later, but when it comes to perceiving the soundstage on the 81T, I would say it's surprisingly wide for an IEM. And that width, that perceived width in the stage gives the 81T a much needed respite when it comes to handling the note separation, when it comes to the delicate elements like voices of the choir or an ensemble, and also handle isolation of the elements. So through Cantate Domino, the 81T did a very good job. Let's see how it fares in First It Give It, because the track is already set in a peculiar key, which is a B flat major, and the snare setup on First It Give It sounds like it should be hollow, but it's not really hollow. And the 81T renders the snare down to a fall. It's a very rapid firing stroke. It sounds like a 2-stroke motorcycle engine revving at very high revs. So the 81T gets that energy of the snare out in the open properly. So there is no ground for me to even try to nitpick that how the snare should sound like. And when I keep the snare aside, I notice the cymbals coming in. I notice the vocals being planted right in the center. Guitars again have a good amount of weight to them, and they don't really sound sibilant or shouty or fatiguing in any way, shape or form. So despite the energetic sound that the 81T has in overall, especially through the mid-range where it's not as recessed as I would have thought, it's a very wonderful listen, and I would say that the comfort of the IEM also aids in my perception of how the overall sound should be. And across moments when the verses come in, that's where some of the good things that the 81T managed to create were lost. So when the verses come in, when the chorus part of the song comes in, the smoothness that was observed in the guitars gets a bit harsh as the mood of the chorus on this track changes every single time the verses end. So there was a slight tinge of harshness that I observed in the guitars, especially in this part, which makes me say that when it comes to complex tracks where you need to keep in mind how the elements on these tracks change and evolve and get back, the 81T will first demonstrate how proficient it is in handling, but you flick the switch up and you will see that it does have a attitude of reluctance in showing its proficiency. So I think Juzear could have used a bit more finesse in tuning the 81T, and that's where my nitpicks end with the mid-range. Let's move on to the highs of the 81T. I would say this is the highs are also the region where whatever good I had spoken about the 81T comes to an end, or I need to pause it, and this is what's important. So I feel that when someone opines or talks about the IEM or the headphone that they are using, they initially need to say that this is just my opinion, and they initially need to say that, yeah, I observed this and this, but as the IEM progressed through tracks, I felt it was becoming better or it was becoming worse. And there are IEMs that actually perform consistently good. There are IEMs that perform consistently bad. But what irks me is when the IEM or the headphone performs inconsistently, period. And that's my biggest problem with the 81T. And the inconsistency of the 81T comes across in two tracks that I choose for the highs. One is Icarus by Patricia Barber, and the second one is Take 5 by Dave Brubeck. So whatever perception I had in terms of detail of the 81T, that is being brought down a certain notch as soon as Icarus kicked up. And the first thing that I would complain about on this track with the 81T is the initial loss of texture in Patricia's vocals. I would say that people need to actually sit down, get some free time and just listen to the discography that Patricia Barber has. Like if you hear the album Mythologies and Cafe Blue, you would realize what vocal textures actually mean. And Patricia's quality in vocals is just something that you need to hear. It's not something that I can convey in writing or in verbose. So keeping aside that, the 81T firstly manages to screw up Patricia's vocal textures by not revealing it in a way that it should have. And this is what bugs me, because it was sounding quite detailed before I put on this track. So if it is not giving me the observations which I usually observe in Patricia's vocals, especially in this track, then I don't think the 81T is as detailed of an IEM as it makes it out to be, or like as it seems to be. And as the track progresses, the way Patricia enunciates her C's and S's, there is sibilance on the 81T. I won't lie. 81T is actually a sibilant IEM, and it's quite noticeable if you put on ear tips like the SpinFit Sippy 100 Plus, which usually enhance the observation on the vocals. It gives the nice boost to the quality of the vocals, and especially on this ear tip, it was sounding quite sibilant. And the note, I would say that it's actually the note weight in my opinion, but Patricia's overall perception, besides the loss in texture, she was sounding thinner than usual, and that should not have been the case. So even if I had used Daft Punk's Get Lucky in the lows, I would have definitely felt that Pharrell was sounding thinner than usual. And this is also something that I observed in Rush's Limelight, because Geddy Lee is already very thin sounding, and the 81T manages to make him sound thinner. And if it's making Patricia sound thin, then the IEM simply cannot handle note weight of the vocals in a way that it should. And timbre is one thing that actually improves towards being accurate, as the percussion on this track was sounding quite accurate. Tonality felt warmer than usual, and once again I would have wanted the IEM to sound less warm, at least on this track, but it was not really hampering the timbre on this track. So Icarus through the 81T was a mildly painful listen. Let's see if it can rectify itself in Dave Brubeck's Take 5. And I have my hopes diminished, because whatever I had observed, the IEM just simply shows that it has the potential to perform, but when you put it to the test, you can see where the IEM is actually clearly lacking. So when it comes to Take 5, the 81T gets the shimmery texture on the cymbals right, but the cymbals sound thin. So what good is the texture improvement? And adding on to that, timbre for the good part is finally settled. The horns and the pianos were sounding accurate, and tonality felt that it was going down, but again it was very inconsistent. Mind you, 81T is a very frustratingly inconsistent IEM, where it just outshines on certain genres and will just scrap the bed out when it comes to genres like this. So I would say that the 81T is definitely not an IEM that you should use for jazz. Anyway, keeping that aside, when the drum section, when the solo drum section comes in Take 5, which comes at around the 2-minute 30-second mark on the track, the resonance of the toms and the snares felt quite diminished, which means that the 81T also struggles with decay. The attack seemed fast, but the decay is cut prematurely short, and some sustain would have definitely benefited the perception of the 81T, at least on the drums. And once the drum section ends and the horns again kick back in, again it's a very decent listening, but I just cannot simply ignore the inconsistencies that the 81T has brushed me with. So there's that, and that's the entire sound section of the 81T. Let's move on to the comparisons and the concluding notes. So the retail price of the Juzear Dragonfly 81T comes in close with certain IEMs that I am just smitten with. The full performer P5 plus 2 is one IEM that consistently and objectively across the entire board beats the 81T. And don't get me wrong that the full P5 plus 2 doesn't sound warm. It is warm. But the way that it delivers that tonality is something that the 81T could have done a lot better given the other proficiencies that it showed in terms of potential. And something like the Tanjim Fola again outright beats the 81T by sounding more balanced, more detailed, more consistent, less sibilant, less harsh, and the fact that the Fola has DSP for the EQ lovers as well as giving you the option to slightly tweak it further with nozzles while costing cheaper than the 81T in my region, I just cannot see why should I recommend the 81T to anyone unless they're getting a damn good deal at the used marketplace, because that's the section where the 81T shines in. And if I were to see further IEMs like the Zigat Lush, which is something that I own, and I've owned this for like almost a year, and the 81T simply does a better performance in terms of detail over the Lush, but I wouldn't really choose the 81T over the Lush in any way, shape or form, because if we are to focus on buying or considering IEF from certain targets, then the Lush is simply one of the best to do it when it comes to the JM1 meta based off the BNK 5128, and the way that and Lush actually puts its own name when it comes to reproducing especially female vocals. Like listening to Patricia Barber on the Lush versus the 81T was a whole world of difference, I would say, and the Lush simply is one of the best sets that you can buy in this segment when it comes to just enjoying vocals without focusing too much on detail. It's a laid back IEM, but it's laid back done right. And if you are actually looking for bright IEMs and something that does so much better than the 81T, and I couldn't have recommended the Let's Shore Cadenza 4 more than that. And it's something that if you can buy it on the used marketplace, especially for the price, then it's one of the best things you can do. Just check out the fit when you try, because if you I'll just bring the things up, because if you see the shells on the 81T versus the Lush, you would see that they are mostly big IEMs. So if you can accommodate them in your ears, I would say that it's worth considering. Even the P5 plus 2 as well. It's a somewhat big IEM. If it fits right in your ear and if it's sounding good with a good seal, then you should not just buy the 81T at retail. I don't think it's an IEM that's supposed to be bought at retail, but if you can get it for a good price on the used market, I would say typically in terms of American currency, I would say US dollar 120 or lower. In terms of Indian currency, if you can find this IEM for 12,000 and lower, then it makes sense, because then the 81T comes a lot closer to something from their own house like the Defiant, and the 81T has much better build quality than what I have seen on the Defiant. So if you can find the 81T at those prices, then it makes sense for me to see you with those IEMs. But otherwise, I won't recommend this IEM to be bought at retail. It's too inconsistent, and the whole overwhelming boom I had observed when it comes to the mid bass is something that I simply cannot slide in. And guitar sounding harsh across movements where it shouldn't, while showing you that it was coming off quite polished, is something that reeks of Juzear being juvenile with their tunings. And even though I wanted to love this IEM and I still appreciate the good things that it has, I simply cannot shrug off the bad things that the IEM also shows. So if you like the 81T, definitely mention it in the comments, and if you felt that I was on point with my impressions, also just mention it in the comments. So that's it for the 81T. Let me just see what else is there for me to opine and ramble upon. So stay hydrated, stay well. I'll see you in the next video.